George fidgeted on the carpet and yawned. His blonde hair gleamed like a halo in the light from my bedroom lamp. He wrapped a lock of his fringe around his index finger, let it to snap back into position, and then began to twist it once more. The child appeared disinterested. Since I had just started school, he had clearly consented to come over for a sleepover so he could see my place, get an idea of who I was. However, I could see that he was already second-guessing his choice. "I thought you said you had a PS4. George's gaze darted about the bedroom as though he was expecting the console to materialize out of thin air. After dinner, we had gone upstairs. After exploring my place and talking for a while, he watched a few odd Netflix series. At first, everything was going well, but as the day's last rays faded and the sky outside grew darker, I could tell George was growing disinterested. I then proposed that we try something a little different. My response was, "Nah, I don't have one. I apologize, but are you still interested in playing this game? Sharing stories with one another? That kid thing, isn't it?" George took a quick look at his wristwatch. I followed his eyes. The first thing I noticed about George was his watch. In English, he sits in front of me, and I saw the watch when a beam of sunlight hit my eye and glinted off its face. It's a very pleasant watch. George had a different kind of digital watch than most of the students in my year. These are the big, blocky ones that light up when you push a button on the side. More mature. It was among the factors that led me to choose George as my guest. "Hey, can I try your watch on?" George grimaced as he glanced up at me. "What?" "Your timepiece. Is it possible for me to try it on? It's quite pleasant." George continued to look at me for a moment, as though to check that the strap was still fastened. One hand moved to touch his wrist. "I apologize, but I don't allow anyone to attempt on my watch. According to my dad, I'm not permitted." His gaze moved from the door to the dark window as he looked around the room again. He let out a sigh. "All right, let's play this stupid game. What am I supposed to do?" I grinned, ignoring his bored expression. "It's very simple. We simply alternate telling terrifying stories to one another. It's like the most terrifying story you've ever heard. The game is then won by the person who is the scariest." George gave an eye roll. In front of him, he extended his lengthy legs. "I'm not aware of any frightening tales. In addition, I may be able to sleep shortly. I'm quite worn out." "Just one each, please. At least one horror story must be familiar to you. Everyone does." "I also know a ton of excellent ones." I waited for a response on George's face. "That is, unless you're one of those kids that get scared quickly. You might not enjoy the game, I suppose." George took a chance, but he bit. "I'm not scared of anything." A frown furrowed the skin beneath his blonde hair. "My big brother and I have seen 18 rated scary movies. I even viewed one that was prohibited on YouTube that we discovered." I remained silent, simply grinned, and turned back to face George. A few seconds later, he sighed once more. "All right, let's play your dumb game. However, once you've failed to frighten me, that's it. I'm heading to bed." George took the lead. To be fair, his story wasn't horrible. He claimed that his uncle had told him about it a few years ago. Not a word I'd heard before. In essence, one of the two children is struck by a car and dies. The mother gives the remaining child some cash so they can go to the shop and buy liver after the burial. Dinner is something to prepare. However, the child takes the money, digs up his sibling, and removes his liver instead, since he is mentally ill. Later that evening, the deceased brother emerges from his tomb to visit the child while he is asleep. Although it's a respectable narrative, I've heard it 100 times already, but I kept it a secret. I leapt at the appropriate moments and made all the appropriate faces. George became quite involved. His watch gleamed in the light from my bedroom lamp as he made a motion with his arms. His forehead was covered in blonde hair. He didn't seem to notice because he was so engrossed in the story. He smiled, brushed the hair out of his eyes, and sat back after it was finished. "I thought you were going to shit yourself at one point," he replied. "Anyway, you might as well give up now. I have no fear of anything. I glanced at him across the room. It had been quiet in the house for several hours. There was still noise coming from downstairs when we first arrived upstairs, including the faint sound of the TV in the living room and the clatter of plates being put away in the kitchen. There was silence now. Tree branches rustled in the breeze outside the bedroom window. Outside, the route was occasionally traversed by automobiles. That was it. I gave George a smile. So you're not scared of anything at all? Not at all. Nothing. Not even stories that are true? George roared with laughter. Good attempt. Would you please hurry up and finish it? I'm bored already. Okay, fine. In order to sit closer to George, I scooted forward on the carpet. Our knees nearly touched. George scowled, but remained motionless. I started by saying, my story is about a family that looks normal enough on the outside, but isn't really normal at all. Once more, George rolled his eyes. By this point, I was becoming very annoyed with him, but I kept my cool. I continued the story as though I hadn't noticed. This family is constantly on the move. They never spend too much time in one location. You see, even though the family is skilled at hiding their secret and disguising themselves, they are still unable to take chances. They could be discovered if they remained in one location for more than a few weeks. Someone may come to terms with who they truly are. So what are they then? I suppressed the temptation to instruct George to sit quietly and listen to the story without interjecting. Rather, I simply smiled at him. When I said, the family are monsters, all of them are monsters. They leave a trail of murdered children wherever they go as they move from town to town. I hesitated, thinking George would cut me off again, but he didn't. All he did was stare back at me. He wrapped a lock of blonde hair around his finger, his face expressionless. The family has a very specific way of doing things, I said. They discover an empty house as they relocate to a new neighborhood. A house that isn't entirely deserted, but rather one where the residents are away on vacation or whatever. One that is going to be vacant for a week or two. See, the family doesn't have to wait long. They are perfectly content with a few weeks. They then proceed to set the trap after breaking into this house. They use their own child. They send him out into the neighborhood to make acquaintances, go around the parks in the area and perhaps pretend to be someone else, to go to the local school, encourage him to socialize with the other children. By now, the family is quite hungry, but they choose not to take any action. They've acquired patience. I stopped and inhaled deeply. I had already recounted this story, but each time I told it, I discovered that I enjoyed it more. But the trick was not to hurry. It had to be enjoyed. When we initially arrived upstairs, I had opened the bedroom window, and now a cool breeze was blowing in. The curtains behind George fluttered. Outside, the garden was filled with trembling tree limbs and murmuring leaves. George remained silent as he observed me. He was focused on me. I went on to say, the child's parents don't have to wait long. They never do. See, they've done a good job training the child. In all of this, he is more than a victim. Despite his youth, he is aware of how the game operates. The child makes his decision after the family has been in the area for a short period of time, a few days, maybe a week. He chooses a new friend to invite to their home again. He also receives an incentive from his parents. He still benefits from it, even though he is still too young to share their tastes, which they say he will only develop as he gets older. Oh, does he get out of it? George stared into my eyes. Over and over, his finger continued to twirl the same hair. When I said he gets the other kids' stuff, whoever he chooses, when his parents are done with them, he gets to retain all they own. A door slammed somewhere in the home under us. George's gaze briefly strayed from mine and then returned to the bedroom door. So, George stared at me while he tried to think of the question. So, what exactly do the parents, what do they do with the kids they take? Oh, they eat them? I said. They consume themselves. While the children are still crying, they rip them open and remove their intestines and stomachs, one by one, wolf everything down till only the husk remains. I smiled. There was the squeak of a floorboard somewhere below us. It was a muted, faint sound, and I doubt George heard it. Can you picture the appearance of someone who has had everything taken out of them? They scarcely resemble humans at all. It resembles the material left over when a snake sheds its skin. George's skin appeared pallid in the light from the bedside lamp. He glanced at me with his lips slightly parted. "But how did they get away with it?" he inquired. "Don't the parents of the children who are stolen come the next day to find them, when their children fail to return home?" I returned George's smile. I had hoped he would ask this question. "Oh, the family's long gone by that point," I replied. "They disappear like nighttime shadows. Only the remains of the deceased child are taken with them. The following day, when their parents arrive to seek for them, all they discover is a closed house that is owned by someone else." There was another creaking floorboard. I spoke a falsehood. "Oh, that was nothing. Most likely it's just the house settling. George, you have nothing to fear." I looked at his wristwatch. I pictured how it would appear on me. I had recently met Jacek, the new lord of the Black Mill, the son of my mother's late childhood friend. He scared me to no end, but he was also the sexiest man I had ever encountered, so my feelings for him were conflicted, and I was pretty sure he liked me. For the express reason that Jacek would see me, my younger brother and I would always go ice skating on the lake by the mill. For the sake of respect, he would always keep an eye on us. I would look him in the eye, let him know I understood, but nothing else. He actually waved to me once in that come-hither manner, and I just shook my head. He returned inside and slammed the door so forcefully that the twin lakes echoed. I didn't go back to the mill until it was dark that day. Jacek took a long time to answer when I knocked on his door, but the expression on his face was worth the wait. "Hello," he said. "Hi." Quiet. Following that, "Fiona, what are you doing here?" "Saying hi." That's it? You're in the middle of the woods at 2 a.m, Fiona. Aren't you cold?" Freezing. As the gears began to work, I heard him swallow and grinned. He held the door wide for me and hurried to step aside. "It's really much warmer in here." I gave myself a hug as I passed him. "Still kinda chilly." "I have a bed too," Jacek said without hesitation. According to empirical data, the floor was not significantly more comfortable than the bed. After trying mine 2 days later, Jacek started scaling the house's wall and onto my balcony at night on a regular basis. He was several years older than me, but he had never dated another woman, which was not shocking given everything. Let's just say that I needed to explain a few things. But the strongest feeling I'd had since my soul had abandoned me was that I was wanted by him. He was aware that I had also been smitten with him from the beginning. It was wonderful to share this intense respect for one another. On a personal level, we also got along well. In addition to teaching me some simple spells that weren't necessarily black magic, but rather practical, non-unholy witchery, he introduced me to the hellhound he had called for companionship. I would read to him, not that he couldn't, he just detested the eye strain, and occasionally take him out into town to teach him the fundamentals of contemporary living. I found it impressive that he could start a fire with just sticks and pebbles, even though he was a bit of a pyromaniac. So cunning. In retrospect, he was actually rather ideal. No man I've ever respected or been more attracted to comes to mind. However, something was absent, and naturally, things went awry. His proposal to me should have come as no surprise to me. "Jacek, we've known each other for 5 months." "What are you saying? My parents have known each other for 3 years. Is it too soon for you?" "Way too soon? Really? For them, 3 months could have worked, but not for me. I apologize." All right, you're heard. I'll hold off." 6 months later, he asked again, and when I continued to say no, he was completely confused. "Honestly, how long do you want to wait?" "I don't know. I'm just not there yet." "It's been close to a year." "Exactly, not even a full 12 months. Jacek raised his arms in the air. "Fine, I'll wait another year, for pity's sake." I now believed that another year would not come, in addition to the fact that I hadn't really considered the ramifications of such a marriage. I refused to because he was asking for too much, too quickly. I wasn't in love with Jacek. I doubted that I could truly love somebody. For such a powerful feeling, too much of me was gone. I didn't tell him that, but he didn't ask either, and I quickly realized that he'd just assumed it. He reasoned that since we were sharing a bed, I must love him, and eventually wed him. It wasn't his fault that he thought that. We just had completely different ideas about what love was. The issue was that I was never able to bring myself to tell him that. Procrastinating for my own benefit while he continued to move closer, I pushed aside the worries of our impending breakup since being with him made me feel good. I made an effort to convince myself that he wasn't genuinely interested in getting married. What the hell would that do? He lived in a haunted mill on what was still my parents' property, and my family was unaware that we were in a relationship. Who in hell would marry us? The devil? All of this must have been obvious to him. He must have realized that we would never be real. He didn't, in fact. When he asked me again 2 years later, I learned about that. I knew I was playing him and had been for far too long, but I couldn't stand it any longer. Once more, winter had arrived, and we had taken a charming little stroll around the Twin Lakes while avoiding the guards who were on their rounds. I started reluctantly, saying, "About that, I don't think we can really go into that direction." Jacek came to a complete halt. "Elaborate. You really don't think this will go anywhere, do you? We can't get married after all. It simply isn't an option." He knitted his brows. "It would be if you wanted to." I muttered, "Then I guess I don't." With a dry throat. "Why?" He spoke in the same flat, repetitive bass that he had used to discuss his father's passing. "Did you never stop to think about it all?" "Wouldn't have asked you thrice if I didn't." "Yes, but I mean, the big picture," I stumbled out as I tried to find the right words. "It'd be kind of complicated, no?" The majority of positives are. Despite their own troubles, Mom and Dad were content. "We're not your mom and dad, though," I countered. "I don't want to spend all of my time in these forests. I'm going to leave this crap behind someday, even though I know my mother wants me to. Someday, but not anytime soon." "So yeah, I would accompany you." "You've literally sworn yourself to the devil." "Exactly. I have incredible external connections." "No, Jake, simply put, there is no way." "I don't get you," he stated without emotion. "What did I do wrong?" "Nothing. This is just out of your control." He said, "Don't you love me?" I became quiet. Something in my chest felt like it was breaking, and I felt incredibly cruel. My face was burning with shame. A bodily sensation occurred. The sting was so excruciating that I felt compelled to make sure a knife wasn't protruding from my body in any way. "Don't you love me?" Jacek stepped closer to me and repeated. I gave a tiny shake of my head, and then I saw something utterly unwholesome. In fact, I could see the moment his heart crushed. All of his features seemed to go awry in this one terrible moment as his eyes sprung open. "Fiona, fucking hell, 3 years have passed?" My cheeks began to well up with hot tears. "I'm sorry. You never considered bringing up any of that. I assumed you simply required more time." His shoulders began to shake, and his pale face turned scarlet as he began to splutter. He yelled, "Why the fuck would you do that to me?" And I automatically retreated a step. "Please, calm down." "No, I'm not going to sue the devil. What were you contemplating? Did you enjoy it?" As his face contorted into a grimace of anguish and rage, I watched in terror as his voice became louder and deeper, gradually twisting into a distorted, chilling growl. I hadn't been walking with this man only minutes before. There was more to this, and I didn't want to know what it was. "Did you like playing me for a fool?" "Jacek, what's happening to you?" I pushed out. "You ought to be aware. You're succeeding." He continued to creep toward me with strangely slow, wobbly steps, but I kept stumbling backwards, attempting to get away from him. Like a warped image on a glitching screen, his entire body was twitching. The sound of bones breaking made my heart sink. with the most terrible sound I'd ever heard, a grinding crunch. His knees were gradually flipping inside out. Jacek fell to the ground, curled up as he started coughing furiously, his legs giving way beneath him. The pure snow was tinted the worst shade of red I had ever seen by the blood he vomited. I was yelling at the top of my lungs in panic. Throwing caution to the wind, I threw myself to the ground next to him and grabbed, held, and cradled him while he continued to wheeze and spit. His eyes were abnormally wide with mindless fear, and I struggled to keep his head motionless as he continued to bang it into the floor in his rage. And then, suddenly, it was over. Jacek's body seemed to stretch forcefully, stiffening like a board as his bones snapped back into place, and he let out one last, long wail. He just lay there on his back in the bloodied, tossed-over snow for a minute, his voice returning to normal, his muscles gently relaxing as he slowly but surely caught his breath. His eyes opened to look at me. They had entirely lost their warmth, and the lingering iciness chilled me to the bone. I flinched back and knelt down to cover my stinging throat. My pulse was still pounding rapidly in my ears, and my heart was still beating frantically. I was completely stunned, and the horror of the scenario continued to hold me. What was that? At last, I took a breath. Gazing up into the gloomy sky, Jacek forced himself onto his elbows. He whispered absently, "I'm sorry, my body functions somewhat differently. I'm all right now." Silently, "I don't understand," I said. He opened his jacket and peeled his shirt down as he slowly turned to face me. I froze where I was. When I laid eyes on his chest, a chill of fear sank into my own being. A hole was present. There was a large, black, seeping hole where his heart should have been. Flayed skin and chunks of shredded flesh protruded from the edges, and blood was still streaming from them. "No." All I could say was that, "Jacek, I'm so sorry." As he stood up, he gave a quiet little laugh. "Oh, you will be." Before I could react, he slapped a fistful of the poisoned red snow directly across my face. He said, "Stay seated, it's okay, this won't hurt a bit." He sat down in front of me and began heaping fresh snow on my lap, a wry smile spreading across his face. Still too stunned to move, I merely stared at him in bewilderment, before waking up and swatting his hand away. He grinned. "Too late." "What?" "You know, you really infuriated me. And this is how I have to move on. He gave his chest a tapping. "This won't get better anytime soon. If you simply had to return to your normal life, that wouldn't be fair. You'll look fantastic, so don't worry." "The fuck are you talking about?" As I stumbled to my feet and shook off the snow, I noticed that the gray coat I had been wearing had transformed into a long, white skirt. I could feel the cold stinging my bare shoulders and realized that only a thin layer of lace protected my upper body from the weather, my first wedding gown. Jacek was giggling uncontrollably. I just stared and shuddered as it reverberated through the forest, and then changed back into loud shuddering wails and cries as he began to walk away. After that, I never saw him again. I quickly discovered what exactly he had done to me. I was no longer able to dress normally. I couldn't bite through the pain since they would fall off on their own if I left them on for more than a few minutes. They would singe my flesh like fire. I resigned myself to the fact that my only option was to go about in my panties, so I began purchasing several bridal gowns. Did you realize that there are people nowadays who call themselves cryptid hunters? It turns out that there are internet groups full of sick badasses who drive out to purportedly haunted places to explore and record themselves, and who purchase battle gear on Amazon. What's the point of my tirade? The location of the land that has been in my family for generations has apparently been disclosed by some jerk. You would think that having a whole woodland would make us wealthy, but the upkeep of it is actually rather expensive. There is no forestry work allowed there, and our employees are always patrolling the region to check for anomalies. It's a risky work, and we've regrettably lost a number of hires. The majority of the time, everything works smoothly, and the forest's activities are kept under control when everyone is cautious and takes the necessary precautions. I wish we could just fence the perimeter and be done with it, but that isn't an option for reasons that are too complex to discuss at this time. It's also quite solitary out here. We typically don't have to deal with any unexpected visitors because it would take 30 minutes to get here by off-road. I often visit a small clearing in my woods that is encircled by towering trees and untamed rose bushes. There, I always start a bonfire so I can sit and unwind. We've got a lot of snowfall and the ground is frozen over right now, but I don't mind the cold. Those lovely icicles dangling from the branches are something I adore. I hide from everything in the clearing. Being alone is almost a need for me because I'm not good with others and get tired from daily conversations. I was hanging out in my usual area yesterday afternoon when I heard a voice calling out to me from behind. I was confronted by a young man of the type I had just described when I stood up. Camouflage backpack, combat boots, cargo pants, and armed. His helmet was equipped with a tiny camera. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Trying not to lose my temper, I asked. He retreated, clearly perplexed. "I thought you were some kind of ghost." "I'm the legal owner of these woods, and if you don't get off my property this instant, I will call the police," I assured him. He stammered, What? Why are you wearing a wedding dress?" "I could dance around naked if I wanted to. This is my private property. How in the world did you discover this location?" "The forest. I came across them on the internet. Someone wrote that there were monsters present." "Cryptids. So you thought you'd go check it out?" I narrowed my eyes at him. Aside from the fact that he was insane enough to come here in the first place, there was something wrong with the person. I couldn't place it, but I felt like something was watching him. It's just a gut feeling, but I never get it wrong. "Yes, I hunt cryptidly. Or rather, I don't actually hunt them. I suppose I would, but I haven't achieved much success yet," he said, laughing awkwardly. "Hear, hear," was my blunt response. He was giving me a strange vibe that I couldn't get rid of. "You continue to trespass. Say, were you stopped by anyone en route inside?" "No. Why? Is there another person present?" How on earth had he managed to get past the guards? He must have unintentionally discovered a blind spot someplace. I made the decision to keep our numerous safety precautions a secret. It would be wise to avoid attracting his attention more. "Nope," I said falsely while feeling my skirt. "Come on, I'll see you out. Follow me." Is it not possible for me to merely glance around? You would be safer if I looked after anything that might be in those woods. I'm certain. I noticed it just as I was going to send him off a bit more firmly. A disruption occurred in his aura. He was the target of something. "What? No, not in my opinion." "Did you run into anyone while traveling? A man with his caftan folded from left to right?" "What's a caftan?" I didn't pay attention to the inquiry. "Did you maybe notice a flock of birds at some point?" "Ah, sure, we're in the woods." I resolutely stated, "There are no birds in my woods anymore. You're in danger. You've been followed by something here." What? "You are a cryptid hunter, aren't you? You ought to be aware." "Well, I haven't had many encounters yet." The man's face was beginning to show signs of panic. "You're trying to get a rise out of me, aren't you?" I could tell by the trembling in his voice that he didn't really think that. "I'm definitely not. Believe me, it's always obvious to me a ghost has been crossed by you." "A ghost? So this place is experiencing real paranormal activity? And you know, already?" "We need to get you out of here," I gave a hiss. "Please, assist me with packing. Put out the fire." While I hurriedly collected my things, he did as I said. Then we started to run. I encouraged him to continue in the hopes of returning to one of the well-traveled routes that would take him to safety. Even though my heart was racing, I knew my friend was far more terrified. He felt in his heart that he had every reason to be. I had no idea what he had anticipated, coming here for a rush, but this was probably too much for him. "What did you do?" Not daring to slow down, I panted. "You must have irritated him in some way. Have you attempted to cut down a tree?" Earlier, I used my crossbow to shoot a rabbit, but I simply injured it. Between breathless gasps, he clenched his teeth and said, "It ran off on me." "Who is he?" I honestly didn't see anyone in the area. I said, "He can come in a lot of shapes. Oh, for crying out loud," as he fell and sprawled across the forest floor after tripping over a root. I grunted under his weight as I caught him and hauled him back up. Wearing all that equipment made him incredibly weighty. But the trees were beginning to relax. I guided the cryptid hunter toward the light that was beckoning through the foliage, with a fresh sense of hope. "Go on, we're nearly there." He refused to move. I scowled at him in confusion. "What are you doing? You idiot, keep running." Sharply, he said, "You've been shitting me this whole time, haven't you? There's nothing to run from, is there? God, please." "Keep running," I said once more. "If you want to live, you need to get out." "Look, lady, I will no longer comply. I'll admit that you almost scared me to death back there, but the good times are done. Sure, I will leave your land, but you could have notified me in a—" When he saw that I was staring at something behind him, he stopped talking. With its massive branch-like antlers reaching up to blend into the vegetation, it towered amongst the trees. Its head looked more like the skull of a sick deer, with bloody flesh strips hanging from exposed bone. Overall, it had a humanoid physique, with thick, rough bark in place of skin. Its arms were excessively lengthy and its back was clothed with moss. From its broad shoulders grew twigs and leaves. Its bright emerald eyes glared at us. Slowly, the hunter turned to look at the monster. His expression dropped. "Kneel," I said, lowering my head and sagging. At first the young man did not respond. "It's too late to flee," I said again quietly. "Kneel and pray for his mercy." At last he fell beside me on the ground. With utter silence, the Leshy moved in our direction. I had prayed that I would never again provoke this beast's fury after my previous close experiences with him. All I could do was hope that I would escape punishment for the explorer's crimes. I thought we had an understanding, you and I. I felt as cold as the wild breeze as I heard the creature's voice. It tipped my chin up and made me stare up at it while one of its long, wooden fingers reached out to touch my face. I silently repeated, "Forgive us, my lord," while maintaining eye contact with the beast. "Then will you let me have this, mortal?" Tears started to well up in my eyes. I was unable to bring myself to answer. "I'll ask you again, will you let me have this, mortal?" "Please don't," I muttered to you. The man next to me had begun to cry, his shoulders trembling with screams of terror. "A lovely soul, you detest carnage so much, and I'll let you look away while I eat." I turned away, embracing myself as I closed my eyes, grabbed by complete despair. I heard gunfire, so loud it pricked my ears. Even though the explorer was most likely fighting for his life, he was aware of the pointlessness of using basic ammunition to protect himself from this monstrosity. "Hey, lady, do something." I pushed off his hand as he began tugging at my sleeve. "Aid me. I apologize for anything, just lend me a hand." I was unable to. No more. When the explorer screamed and was pulled from my side, my blood turned cold. The sound of bones cracking, muscle and flesh being torn, and blood splattering blended with his shouts of pain. It was warm and sticky when it struck my bare back, leaving my white gown discolored. My lower lip was bleeding from where I had sunk my cheeks, and tears were streaming down my cheeks. It seemed like forever before the horrifying sounds had finally subsided. Behind my back, a contented grunt rumbled. "Now, sweetheart, get on your way. Additionally, don't disturb my animals by crying." I walked away without turning around. I switched on the shower at home so I could sit under it and cry. I made an effort to convince myself that this cryptid hunter wasn't a huge loss to the world. But even if his preferred pastime had been blatantly foolish and misguided, he would have most likely still been a regular guy in spite of everything. As I walked about my property looking for signs of his arrival, that was what I was thinking about. I discovered his car, a dilapidated brown pickup truck, on the edge of the property's eastern boundary. I discreetly disposed of it, The poor fellow, all he had hoped for was some action. The fact that he had never looked up what a leshy was, however, may be used against him. I had known what the leshy, or rather what it was the first time I had seen him. Despite his occasional kindness, my mother had told me that he and others like him had a tendency to take young ladies. Since I truly received our farm from her side of the family, I still hold her lessons in high regard. She informed me about these grounds and their potential hazards. I used to spend all of my free time in the woods, camping occasionally and going on long walks through them, even before Mom passed away. After the first snowfall in the winter, I was strolling around the grounds to have a look around the time I started wearing my bridal gown. It was a lovely sight, with the treetops and fields blanketed in a fine, delicate covering of spotless white. Everything was okay until I noticed a figure coming from over the trees. I came to a halt. This guy was either one of the local entities or he had gotten lost, because only my family and I were supposed to be strolling about here. He got closer and closer till he stopped a few feet in front of me. As I looked at him, my heart fell. His caftan was folded from left to right. He was carrying a big cudgel, and there was not much expression on his bearded face. He had a Slavic accent and talked in a harsh, growling voice. "I've previously seen you in my woods. Are you not the heiress?" I forced myself to swallow the knot in my throat and said, "Yes, sir." "Then you must be aware of my identity." "Yes, sir." "Iris, what am I to call you?" I paused. Breathlessly, I whispered, "My name is Fiona." "You're really attractive." He gave me a head tilt. "If your eyes weren't so dead, I could love you." After pausing, he picked up the cudgel and continued going. As he walked past me, he said, "Send your mother my regards," over his shoulder. "When you enter our property, there are other things besides him that could kill you. Unbelievably, there are even worse deaths than being devoured alive." This is a warning, even though you may have guessed it before. Explorers or cryptid hunters are apparently frequenting my property. Obviously, the person that was eaten couldn't have been the only one. We were made public by someone. More security is already being implemented. There are two primary goals for this post. First of all, if you were the first to find these forests and post their position online, kindly remove it. More harm than good is being done by you. You were lucky, but I'm not sure how you got out of here alive and unnoticed by me and my crew. Don't return here, for your own sake. I have been searching the internet, Reddit, 4chan, and other sites. I have read and seen things that I will never be able to get over, and I still haven't located the idiot who was responsible for my haunted woods. Things worsen. Since then, 2 of our security personnel have reported attempted intrusions. In both cases, the potential trespassers were led off the property, but it's impossible to tell how many might have gotten past the security measures. People, please stop. Simply stop. I'm dying because of you. In addition to being worn out and upset, I'm also losing hair. There will probably be some corpses in the spring. I'm prepared to wager. When all of that snow and ice melts, some horrifying sights will undoubtedly be revealed. I've alerted the staff and instructed them to use extra caution. In the near future, once we have the resources once more, we will also be searching for additional employees. We are currently losing money as a result of yet another poorly thought out business plan that my younger brother came up with. There's basically nothing worth going into further depth about. All of this is happening at such a terrible moment. In any case, we get into enough trouble around Yuletide every year. The Yule Boys began coming into town one by one on December 12th. They have always enjoyed harassing our estate in particular. Fortunately, they will soon all disappear once more. You're lucky if you're unaware of the Yule Boys. Basically, they are a group of annoying old bearded pranksters who get into trouble over the Christmas season. Each of them is involved in something of their own. For instance, the spoon licker is a spooky-looking, undernourished man who licks food residue off of used spoons. Then there is the door slammer, who keeps people from sleeping at night by running around the house and creating a lot of noise. When we were young, it was all enjoyable. For the sheepcoat Claude, A Yule boy with rigid peg legs who enjoys harassing sheep. My brothers and I would set up tripwires. We would wait for him to arrive by hiding in the corral all night. When he fell into our trap, we would all laugh at him. He would become enraged, sulking, and raising his fist at us as he marched away. Additionally, we would use rolled-up socks to block the doors by jamming them into the hinge split. This meant the door would give in somewhat at first, then lash backwards, giving the door slammer a scare any time he tried to do his thing. Thus, we were never really frightened by the Yule boys. We were more concerned about their mother. It was more than enough for me that I only ever saw her twice. I wish we hadn't ever had to learn about her. I'm going to fulfill my promise from last time and give you the story in line with your interest in my woodland and the hauntings. To give you some context, I was the oldest of 7 children growing up. Yes, 7. If you've ever wondered what it's like to have 3 younger siblings, the answer is, even though we had our share of fistfights, the lads and I generally got along well. I never really interacted with the other gals. They never really resonated with me, and I'm not sure why. But my brothers loved me, and they always seized the opportunity to do something stupid with me. Mary Ann, the youngest of the sons, Casimir, and Jeremy, the second-born, were present. We weren't awful kids, we were just a little disobedient. Mary Ann excluded. He had a tendency to overreact, either because of or in spite of being the baby of the family. He would destroy the living room, bury dead mice in our parents' shoes like a cat, and set dung on fire. I have no idea why he did that. Not because he was created by us. Our parents were never the target of the group's jokes, and we always caused the least amount of damage to the house. Yes, we did love him, but he was hardly a well-behaved kid. He resembled one of the Yule boys more than anything else. We were permitted to watch television a little later than usual one evening, when I may have been around 12. The 7 of us were all laying on the floor, each wrapped in a nice blanket, while Mom and Dad sat huddled on the couch behind us. At the time, they were showing some well-known children's films. With the snow falling directly outside our window, it felt really cozy to sprawl on the plush bearskin rug, right up until the doorbell rang. Everything was fine. Being the eldest, I always made a concerted effort to exhibit the greatest initiative, leadership traits, etc. Thus, I jumped to my feet right away. I skipped to the door and opened it as much as the chain that held it in place would allow before Mom could stop me. My voice stuck in my throat as I opened my mouth to welcome the newcomer and inquire as to why they were in our area at this hour of the night. I had never seen a more repulsive individual in my short life than the woman looking in at me through the crack. Not only was she tall, but she was also gigantic, with her big head falling low and her giant body slumped over. Her nose was long and knobby, and her gray matted hair flowed down from a ragged, mangy-looking head. Her pale skin was rough as sandpaper, and her pores were as large as lunar craters. Her decaying teeth showed through her split lips as she talked. "You look delicious." Her remarks were accompanied by a bad scent, and I recoiled at the sound of it as well as her uncanny raspy voice. My legs wouldn't move as I stood there paralyzed with terror, but I was abruptly dragged back into the warmth of our living room. In order to protect me, my mother stepped forward and blocked my way. I thought there was little chance of her entering anyhow because the door was still locked, but I had felt so exposed and helpless in her presence, like a lamb just before it is killed. "Dear madam," the giantess said once more, referring to my mother, "this evening I am quite hungry. Feed me, please. I must eat." She extended a bony hand through the doorway. Her filthy, long fingernails nearly resembled talons. "Would you spare a morsel for me?" My mother spat back at her. "Get lost." Her voice was the most consoling sound I could think of at the time, yet it was poisonous and deadly. "Don't ever come near this house again if you know what's good for you." "Don't dismiss me, most gracious lady, please. I just ask that you give me a morsel, a small morsel. There is more than enough for you. If you don't leave, I'll beat you till you're raw, you disgusting parasite." At some time, my siblings had begun to listen in. Dad appeared to be attempting to get them to focus again on the television, but that was not going to happen. "Eat shit and die," Marion yelled, laughing as if he had just cracked a joke. Where did he learn that language at such a young age? Only God knows. The giantess gave him a short glance as Mom turned to Hushishim. Her eyes were gleaming. "Go away," Mom said again, a bit more forcefully. "You're not welcome here." She then slammed the door in the face of the woman. "Mom, who was that?" Still a little shaken, I asked. "Her name's Grilla," she replied, fumbling nervously with her sleeve, "and she's no one you need to be worried about." That night I didn't sleep well. Grilla was hidden in my closet in my dream. I woke up with a start and went to get a glass of milk, which is what I always do when I'm restless. I could hear my parents talking in hushed, irritated tones as I padded past the master bedroom. What had they been up to? I hovered, straining my ear to the wooden door, intrigued. "Why didn't you just give her something from the kitchen?" Dad inquired. "She's not actually after food, you know," my mother growled. "It will only get worse if we make fun of her. She will continue to return since she feels accepted here. Remember last year, don't you?" "Hey, I understand. I only wish the children hadn't been present." The way she simply, stared at them really frightened me. "It should, testily," Mom said. "You think I was fine with it? Is anything altered by that she caught sight of them?" "I don't think so," Mom sounded unsure. "At least, I don't know that it does." "I'm being too reassuring there, honey. Should I tell you that she doesn't make me feel uncomfortable? She has always made me fearful. Back when I was younger, my parents scared me into acting in certain ways by telling me stories about her, left me permanently scarred." I pulled away from the door as a cold went down my spine. I was very conscious of every sound I made as I crept back down the hallway to my own bedroom. Both my heartbeat and the sound of my nude feet slamming on the carpeted floor appeared to be increased to an abnormal volume. All I wanted was to return to the ostensibly secure confines of my covers and hide behind my blanket till dawn. At that moment, I heard a small, muffled grunt coming from Marion's chamber at the end of the road. Not daring to move a muscle, I came to a halt. What was that noise? Did I hear it wrong? I stood and listened, motionless as a statue, my ears pulsing. Once more, there it was, a muffled whimper, then a dull thud. I had to go take a look. I assumed my younger brother was only experiencing nightmares, just like I had before, but I still didn't want to. Each and every one of my limbs appeared to be against the notion of continuing. I forced my legs to move and continued down the corridor, which seemed to be much longer, until I arrived at Marion's chamber. I knocked softly on the door. No answer. Inside, everything had become quiet. "Marion?" I muttered. "Nothing has changed." I pushed the door open slowly and slipped through the breach with agility. But as soon as I saw what was within, I came to a startling stop. This terrible, dreadful woman was standing in the center of the room. She scowled down at me from above, her back hunched to make room for her under the ceiling at all. Her long, lolling tongue spilled blood as she opened her mouth to speak, and she paused to lick her lips, spreading the substance across her cheeks. "What's the matter, my love?" "I just ate a morsel." She then raised her hand, and I started screaming before I had a chance to properly comprehend what I was seeing. The hair on my little brother's decapitated head was being held up by her long, gnarly fingers. His mouth twisted in a silent scream of terror. His glassy, dead eyes stared straight through me. Gryla ducked to wiggle her way through the open window after laughing and dropping the head on the ground. I watched as she ran through the snow outside toward the woods, her laughter echoing in the cold winter air, her filthy gray cloak following her. My mother broke down immediately as my parents stormed in a few seconds later. Her cries of surprise, sorrow, loss, and heartache were more terrifying than the giantess's voice. My body trembled with sobbing as I collapsed into my father's outstretched arms and pressed myself against him. To prevent the other children from entering and witnessing Marion's remains, we locked the door after us. For a moment, we were all gathered in a big, shivering mass, and the only thing we could do was sit and cry. We didn't get up, not even to shut the window that let the chilly breeze in. After that, Christmas was never quite as much fun. Marion's room was never entered again. After burying his skull in the yard, we sealed off his room from the outside. That was it. My parents unexpectedly lost a kid, and I was left without my younger brother. Nothing could be done to stop the erasure of a life. Every member of the family had a new wound that would only heal with time. You would think that this tragedy would strengthen our bonds, but in reality, I think that this was the night that we all began to drift apart. I was the only person my mother ever confided in about her suffering. She always saw me as the kid who had discovered Marion's head and had endured the second highest amount of suffering. She had always intended to formally name me the heiress to the woods, and our relationship only strengthened her resolve. She became less devoted to my siblings. She made it obvious that I was her favorite, but she never ignored them. Dad began to feel a certain amount of resentment against her, and consequently toward me. Yes, I believe that's how we all started to drift away. We would never be able to reunite. Only my crew and I would remain in the large mansion as it gradually emptied. It has been terrible to recount this, of course. I hope this serves as yet another reminder to stay away from this place. Our property isn't a Halloween attraction or funhouse. Please show some appreciation for my efforts. I have devoted my entire life to protecting this forest and preventing the things that are inside from pouring out. Only a very small amount